right, this is a special bonus edition of Vulnerable Creatures. It's been a little over a year since we published our whole series, and a story came our way that we wanted to share with our listeners, and we're going to do a very lightly, if any at all, edited episode now to tell that story to the guest, and we're actually going to keep this guest's identity private for obvious reasons of non-retribution for employment and things like that. So this is sort of an anonymous source. Lauren, do you want to add anything to that?
I want to say hello to everybody. I'm Lauren Hugg. This is Vulnerable Creatures.
Okay, so let's introduce our guest, not by name, but can you tell us, you contacted us after you had listened to the story to let us know you had a similar thing happen to you, similar to part of our story. If it's okay to identify you as a veterinarian, you can take it from there, I guess, if you want to tell us about what happened.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, what was it in the story that made you think, this sounds familiar?
There were quite a few points, I suppose, that became similar where I had an interaction with basically the criminal justice system in regards to my own personal dog, and felt that I didn't have a lot of a voice, and it ended up being a somewhat traumatizing personal experience, not knowing that this was something that could just happen to someone. I feel like I'm generally a law-abiding citizen, and it was a situation in my own home, in my own yard, and it just left me unsettled for a long time, even after everything has settled at this point. And I just heard that in your podcast as well, with, everyone in it that felt very affected by the event, and felt a lot of emotions about it, and that it wasn't just simply, another case, that, these are people involved, and that there's a lot of emotions and trauma that can go with being charged for something as simple as a dog charge.
Yeah. And I want to be clear, too, for our listeners, this is not going to incorporate the theme of our story that related to autism. So that was our character, Christian. So this is going to probably touch on all the other themes we have in the story. I just wanted to throw that out there so there was no confusion about the autism theme. I don't think that enters this story at all, but it touches everything else. It touches criminal justice, it touches animal law enforcement, and everything you just said about people's lives. So, go ahead.
Why don't you go ahead and you want to tell us about what happened? Yeah. Like what went on?
So I had a situation where my dog was in my backyard, and the fence that existed between me and my neighbor had recently been reconstructed and was such that it was a alternating slat type of design, where dogs' noses could easily reach each other's noses. And my dog interacted with my neighbor's dog, and to the point where they both were fighting and were biting each other's faces, essentially. And both dogs, had wounds, and my dogs were minor, so no intervention was needed. And I went over to talk to my neighbor, and she was screaming at me, and then came over and told me that she was calling animal law enforcement. And I offered, prior to that, actually, had offered to pay for whatever veterinary care she needed. I went over to try to talk to her to see if her dog was okay and what was going on. And that was when she was screaming at me. And then she came over and just told me that animal law enforcement was going to come over. And so they came over, and I was presented with dangerous dog charges. And that was just kind of the end of it. It was the ticket, and, they just asked me, were they fighting? And there was no point in me lying and saying, no, my dog was inside. She's making that all up. And that's just not who I am and never will be. So I was like, yes, our dogs fought at the fence. And so I received dangerous dog charges.
Did your neighbor receive any charges, to your knowledge?
I don't believe so, but I don't know.
And did your neighbor know you were a veterinarian by profession?
I actually don't know. I interacted with her husband, but he had recently left the picture, and so I didn't interact with her very much, so I don't know that she knew that.
And did your dog have anything in the past that would have made him or her out to be a dangerous dog?
No,
or this is a well-behaved dog usually?
And that was what was wild to me, was at that point in time, he had been going to a doggy daycare for I want to say 6 years, and had no instances. And this is a smaller doggy daycare, and they're very cautious about any aggression. They've even approached me about other dogs that they've had issues with. And they even were willing to write him a reference letter because his behavior had always been so good at the facility over years.
So, and I appreciate the way that you're giving the benefit of the doubt to your neighbor and saying, you know, I tried to do the right thing by offering to pay, and I wanted to know if their dog was okay. But it sounds like it's possible that this altercation between the dogs was actually instigated by your neighbor's dog, given your dog's history of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, you know, as a veterinarian, I know dog behavior, and so the reality is they probably both were instigating it. I mean, the reality is that they both were on their own property. They both were protecting their property and their people. And so they both probably felt threatened by the other dog. And so it was just normal dog behavior that, you know, was taken. And I you know, ultimately, my neighbor just, I think, was upset about the situation and decided to use the law to help her in that situation.
And when animal law enforcement showed up, some listeners might think, oh, well, you're a veterinarian. They're going to listen to you. They're going to take your side, or they're going to like have maybe a professional courtesy and kind of defer to your judgment or something. But did that happen? Did they give you any special treatment whatsoever?
No,
or did
basically they did exactly what they would do for anyone else, which is present them with the ticket of the dangerous dog. And it just eventually that just gets taken to the the court system. And so, I mean, she wasn't, the officer wasn't any different with me than I think, you know, normally they would be. And I wasn't expecting any special treatment because I know that they're just out there to do a job and they're just there to kind of assess the situation the best they can. But I definitely was taken aback that there was like no discussion involved. It was just, you just hand over the ticket and then you show up in court is really the next step.
Interesting, because in our story, we definitely presented some questions around how ALE handled the entire situation, and some of the people in the story felt like it could have been done differently or better, and so anyone who listens to those episodes will know what we're talking about. But it sounds like you as well could have wanted a little bit more out of that experience, a little more thorough of a investigation at the moment, or at least more talking, more listening to what you had to say. Is that a correct portrayal of what you just said? Is it?
Yeah, at that moment in time, I was super distraught. I mean, I was scared that they were going to take my dog because they were there serving me a ticket, and I didn't know what the intention was behind all of that. So I was pretty emotional at that point in time. So I'm not even sure if, you know, a discussion could have occurred, but I realized, you know, quickly that it was just they hand you a ticket and you go to court. I mean, I've never experienced the situation myself. So it was interesting and unfortunate how quickly it went down.
So you went from your dog being injured and then trying to figure out what happened, offering to pay for any care that your neighbor's dog needed. So there's all that adrenaline, to then a fear of your dog being taken away from you once ALE got involved. Like, what was that feeling like, to be afraid of that?
I mean, it was just very overwhelming. I was contacting a lot of friends, trying to figure out, you know, if they knew what was going to happen and what I should do. And, you know, at that point, I felt really scared because I couldn't talk to my neighbor, and, you know, there was an officer essentially at my door presenting me with a ticket. And I had never been in such a situation or imagined such a situation happening. And I didn't quite know how to handle it, truthfully.
And I think it's so fascinating to me that I would assume, and clearly this is a wrong assumption, that a veterinarian would know more about this process and would know that you probably weren't at risk of your dog being taken away. But that's just not how it felt, and that's not what was going through your head at that time, even with your experience with the the medical side of caring for animals. The legal side is a whole different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely know animals that are been taken away for neglect, or dogs that are used as fighting and more serious situations. But I've heard of all sorts of dogs that getting in fights, and I didn't realize that this was the outcome that would happen.
And in our story, too, we ends with some of the folks we talked to, particularly when we talked to the Humane Society of Pikes Peak region. They said when they could, they would do an educational intervention, like show someone how to take care of the dog better and dig a hole for the bowl so it doesn't fall over and spill the water, that kind of thing. Do you feel like there could have been an educational intervention in this case rather than just issuing the ticket? Like, could they have taken you and your neighbor aside and been like, hey, listen, this is dog behavior. You guys seem like, both the dogs might have been at fault. The fence has clearly got some
Fix
holes.
the fence,
Yeah,
and
like
if it's not fixed in 3 weeks.
Yeah, let's put some different kind of fence up, whatever. Do you feel like an educational opportunity was missed there? Or
my presumption is because my neighbor wanted to press charges that was their legal binding, was that they had to do something. I don't know, but I assume that Ailey didn't have a lot of choice.
Right. You kind of got forced into the legal system, and which again is a common, well, in our story, kind of something like, someone calls on you in some context, suddenly you're in it. Like now you're in the system. And it was just a normal day before that.
And I know we're not playing what if, but I wonder what if you had called instead of your neighbor. Would it all have looked totally different? And then would their dog have been issued a citation instead of yours? I don't know, but
I don't know either.
It's that kind of thing where once somebody makes the call, the process has started.
Yeah.
So this is sort of the first part of your story, which is what happened, and then Ailey's arrival. Now this ushers in, of course, now you're in the system. So now you've got this ticket. What happens after that? What was your next process? What was your...
So on the ticket, it gives you a court date that you have to appear on. And so you have to appear to the court and basically stand in front of a judge. And they go through the process for you when you're in the court system, which was completely new to me. I've never been charged with anything. And they discuss that basically your options is to plead guilty, and they continuously tell you that jail time is a possibility even with these types of charges. Even though it is unlikely, they have to say that this is a possibility. They say that you can speak to a DA, or the third option being that you can plead not guilty and request a trial. And then I assume whether you represent yourself or obtain a lawyer and those types of things. So you have to decide one of those options and plead something on that date, which I didn't know any of that until I got there, because no one talks to you about what you do when you get charged with a criminal activity or criminal charge. So
you didn't know those three options were going to be the only options, and that you would be deciding it on that day. Like you couldn't have left without making a decision, at least to your knowledge.
Yeah, as far as I understood. And I could be wrong.
That also, how did you feel in that moment?
The court system was slightly terrifying. I felt very small. I am, generally, and I'm an educated person that kind of understands a lot of things, and I had no idea what was going on. I had no idea what I was doing, and I was, upset because I didn't feel I was guilty, and saying yes, my dog is a dangerous dog felt completely wrong. But I was by myself, and I had no idea what else to do. And I did actually call a lawyer and talk to them, and they basically said, you can go talk to the DA and see kind of what deal they will give you. Or, if you want to take this to court, then you can pay the lawyer fees and take this to court. So.
Did they give you any, and I know this, they don't always give an estimate, but did they have any estimate about how much it would cost to take it to court?
Well, their retainer was $5,000, and that's just getting that, and that's just getting started, obviously. So they made it pretty clear that was, just the starting base, and then it goes up from there.
And were you aware of, or did they explain when you were in court, any other possible implications for you professionally or anything? Maybe an average dog owner wouldn't need to worry about any of these things, but given veterinarian profession, could it have any implications for you?
They didn't say anything about that. And I think I was so in shock, I didn't honestly even think about that. So
Yeah, understandable. So did you talk to anybody when you were in the courthouse? How did you handle the decision-making process?
I just took it as like, okay, well, I am not guilty, and I'm obviously not going to go to jail for this, and so I pled not guilty and requested to speak to a DA, which seemed to be what everyone was doing. And so truthfully, when you have no idea what else you're doing, you're kind of looking around like, okay, well, what else is everyone else doing? Okay.
The social cues.
Yeah. I was like, this is very weird. I guess that's what we do here. So.
Oh my gosh. I'm just thinking, I just had this moment where I'm like, oh yeah, you're learning a process that you've never been part of by other people who have probably never been part of the process either, because you're not getting guidance. Yeah, that's hard.
So you leave court that day. Some time goes by, I guess, before you get to the DA?
That day, if you requested to speak with the DA, they give you another appearance that you show up at a different time. And you do waive your right to a speedy trial if you elect that. So they're basically this can take as long as it takes. So we'll give you a date, but you waive your right to a speedy trial at that point in time if you elect that choice. So I got a new date, and then I was to come back and speak with the DA and see if they would basically offer you a deal, is what I got the understanding of. And if I wanted to completely get the charges dropped, I would have to, go to court. And I wouldn't ever feel comfortable representing myself. I barely knew what to say in front of a judge, let alone represent myself there. So, obtaining a lawyer and doing those types of things, which was shocking to me. I had no idea that was going to be the next steps, I guess.
So at this point, you've taken, I'm assuming taken time off of work, or you've had to do something to go to court the first time. Mm-hmm. Now you have to do something to go to court a second time. Yeah. And you're weighing the options of either going to trial and having to get a lawyer and all of that, and how long that will take, versus the other option of what was the other option at that point?
It was talking to the DA, which obviously sounded much less time consuming. And at that point, it was I kind of realized, I was like, this is the reality of the situation. These are my choices. There's no other choices, because at this point it doesn't even matter what my neighbors said, because the charge has been placed. And so nothing can be even redacted at that point in time. It doesn't really matter what anybody thinks. So it's in the system as far as my understanding of the judicial system at that point.
How long did it take before you did finally get to sit down with the DA?
It wasn't incredibly long. I think it was another month out.
So when you did finally get to sit down, how did that meeting go?
So, that was probably the worst experience of it all. I came in and I brought, pictures of the fence, and I brought, a referral letter from my daycare. And I brought all of this information about how my dog had behaved, and in an environment, not just in my home. And I also came as a veterinarian, being able to speak to dog behavior and say, yes, this can happen, but my dog wasn't, at loose, at large, and he didn't bite someone, and he was in his property. And at that point, the DA, he scoffed at me being a veterinarian, and I think he thought it was just disappointing that as a veterinarian, your dog should be perfectly behaved and should never fight anyone. And it was very uncomfortable. And he offered me the deal, and then I tried to explain some stuff, and he basically was like, this is your deal. What would you like to do? And the deal was that I would be on probation for 6 months, and basically I could not obtain or incur any additional animal charges whatsoever. So if my dog was barking in the backyard and someone called ALE on my barking dog, then I would not only get the initial dangerous dog charges, but I would also get those additional charges. And there was no plea deal at that point in time, that I'm just charged at that point in time. So for 6 months, I just worried a lot. I walked my dogs at 5 a.m. so that there was no one ever around. I walked them on a leash in the backyard. They never went in that backyard off leash ever again. I didn't take them places that we normally went to. I have another dog, and I just didn't do anything with them because I realized that even something as simple as my own dog being in a backyard and fighting with a dog next door would result in this. So what else could possibly happen? I'm walking my dog and the leash breaks and she's off running by herself now. And someone calls ALE. So I realized that it didn't take much and that I had to be super, super careful if I wanted the deal to basically go through. And then the other part of the deal was that I pay for the veterinary care, which I had already done. So I basically brought in a receipt of proof that I had already paid for this. And so that was already done.
So it dramatically changed the way that you approached everything to do with your dogs for 6 months at least.
Yeah. I actually ended up even moving because I ended up feeling so uncomfortable in that situation, and realized that, that the legal system was, not going to help me for sure. And certainly I could be trapped in that again. And, the repercussions for my dogs were serious. And I didn't quite know how to mitigate that when I felt like I had already done all the normal things a normal person would do, remaining your dog in a yard. And, I went out there right when it happened and offering to help deal with things. I know lots of friends who have had situations with their dogs where they're at a dog park and they get in a fight and, people help to, offer to pay and then everything goes away. And I realized that it could be much more serious than that if someone decided to take it that way.
Yeah, if somebody wants to use the legal system for whatever reason to force it into that type of into the courthouse, into the prosecutorial system. Did you feel when you were talking to the prosecutor that they had any notion of all of the implications for your life and what taking this deal would mean?
It was certainly just like all right, this happened to you. It felt like an algorithm. I felt like an algorithm is they basically here are the charges. Here's what we can offer you. If you do these things, then you'll be good. And in their eyes, it probably was like, oh, this is simple. All you have to do is not mess up for 6 months and you'll be fine. But I had already had no idea how I had messed up in the first place. And so it was just really uncomfortable. He made, I tried to discuss my dog's good behavior and he said, it wasn't like that this day. And so then I was like, okay, well, if it only takes this to land me talking to a DA about going on probation, saying I was on probation, I had a probation officer. It was the most insane experience I've ever had as an adult person that generally abides the law.
And when we first spoke, when you first reached out to us, and I might be misremembering this, but did you say, you already said you kind of felt small in the courtroom in front of the judge, but I want to say that, did you tell me you also felt small that day that the DA said something like, when you identified yourself as a veterinarian, did you say that either they said you should have known better then, or was that just the feeling you got? I feel like you told me that. I could be wrong.
He said, well, that doesn't bode well for you. And I didn't know if he meant that, I should have known better, or if, I didn't know, but it was clearly that he thought that wasn't going to help my case and it might hurt it, in fact. And so I stumbled. I had all these things put together and, talking points, not to be difficult, but just to be like, this was the case and this was the situation.
To make the case.
And I quickly realized that he didn't care about any of that. And, it was just kind of a system to move people through is what it felt like. You're just sitting at a little tiny desk with someone next to you also being offered a plea deal, and you're listening to whatever deal they're getting and trying to focus on the person in front of you.
This wasn't even a private conversation, and this is like a lineup.
Yeah, they have a half wall right there, so you can't see the person, but you can completely hear them. They're sitting right next to you, so they have two people going at all times. It seemed like, or at least when I was there, that was how it was.
Was it respectful overall, or did you feel like talked down to, or demeaned in some way. I mean, not to make any assertions, but assumptions.
I don't think he was malicious, but he definitely didn't seem to have any level of caring, and I don't know how much caring you can have when you're in a giant system like that, pushing cases through like that. So I try to give people the benefit of the doubt that I felt like I didn't get, and I don't think he went home that night and was glad that he put charges on me. It just seemed like this is the system, this is what we do. We've checked the box, and we move on to the next thing. And going through the experience, the biggest thing for me was realizing that these are people that are being pushed through this system, and I think there's a lot of people who they've gotten trapped in something that they had no idea they'd be in.
Yeah, I heard you say that it was almost like an algorithm, and it reminded me of what Christian said too, sort of at the end of the whole podcast experience, was like, it's just like you put in one and one and you get this outcome, and that these aren't human beings. Nobody's treating these people like people. It's just, this is what the system does.
Yeah, it just kind of chews on you. I remember, I think we also spoke again. Do you think your dog's well-being sufferred for those 6 months? Like I know my dog, when I used to not walk him enough or not get him out for a really good run, he'd get all antsy and anxious, and his behavior would change, right? Like the dog needs that good run. And I remember I'd have to get him to a dog park or somewhere bigger and open to give him that really good run, because even in my backyard, I couldn't quite get him up to speed, I was just wondering, as you were being so cautious for that probationary period, and you were so worried again about the leash breaking or those small details, were your dogs not able to get that full good run because you had nowhere to take them that wasn't a risk for that? Or could you find an outlet where it's like, oh, if we got far enough off trail, way up in the mountains, and I know no one's around, I can finally do the thing I need to do? But even then, you're like, what if someone comes around that next bend? I can't even afford to have that happen.
Yeah. I mean, for 6 months, we didn't do a lot of the normal things that we do. Even on-leash hiking made me really uncomfortable because someone else will have their dog off-leash. And if their dog comes, I remember thinking a lot that if their dog came up to mine and a scuffle happened, like if they blamed my dog, that could be an outcome. So yeah, for 6 months I was super stringent, or super strict. Now it's still something I think about now. I mean, this is like a year and a half later, at least, and I still think about frequently. I'm always very cautious with my dogs, which people should be. Like, you shouldn't be letting your dogs just run about, and dogs will interact with each other and have negative interactions, even if they're generally well-behaved dogs. And so always keeping my dogs on leash and paying attention, and those types of things. But every time I'm out there, I think about it still.
I think about when you talk about that part, when we decided to name our show Vulnerable Creatures, it had to do with really keying in on the theme of vulnerability and how many people in the story at different times were vulnerable in their own ways. And that started, of course, with Christian's vulnerability. And we had talked about statistics about, the people who are more likely to be abused in society, elder, people who, like with any kind of disability type situations. There were so many examples like that. And I think about where you, during that period of time, during that probationary period, when you were that worried, were literally extremely vulnerable. Again, if someone else's dog comes up and starts trouble, it has nothing to do with you. You're still the one who takes the rap. Like, I can't imagine what that's like to leave the house every day or just to be in the backyard with the dogs every day. Is that accurate? Did you feel an intense vulnerability? Is it a fair word to apply to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely felt vulnerable. I still do. I've had instances where I'm hiking with my dogs and an off-leash dog comes up to mine, and it was so terrifying for me because I was like, if they decide to call and make a claim, this could be the end of my dog, even though my dog was on leash and their dog was a very friendly dog, but came up to my dog, and my dog is barrier reactive. That's what he, is bothersome to him. So the fence was, an issue that he could reach the dog, but not really. And the leash actually is a thing. And obviously that falls on the owner to do some training and those types of things. And so there is some of that. But the reality is that a lot of these issues were not issues. And then the further I, retracted him from interacting with other dogs, the further I, backed him away from things is, now he has less and less, ability to interact with other dogs because I keep him around less dogs, the reality.
Well, I think it's one of the things that is unique about anything with the criminal justice system that involves animals. Is that in essence, you as an owner, you're feeling like I did something wrong, I'm being judged, I'm in trouble, I have to follow the system. And also there's this perpetual fear that your beloved animal is going to be taken away from you if you don't do all the things that need to be done. And so it's almost a double whammy of like, I could be in trouble, I could go to jail, I have to pay money. And also this being that I love could be taken from me if I don't do everything perfectly.
Yeah. I mean, it's been traumatic. I mean, it sounds, it's a cliche word, but it is true. Because I constantly worry about that. And, now I see other dogs that, have behaviors like that. And, the good of it is that I now step back and say, okay, that person might just be having, a bad incident. Like, their dog might have just reacted to something like that, and another dog might have attacked their dog like mine, and now he is more reactive. And so the thing I'm trying to do is show more compassion for others who have gone through a situation, because it made me realize how easy it is to get into that system.
And that kind of is my next question is, why do you want to talk about this? Like, what else do you want people to know about anything related to the criminal justice system or animal welfare?
Yeah, I know there's a lot of good people out there, and there certainly are animal situations that require, animal law enforcement and the justice system, and they're doing a lot of really good work. For me, hearing your podcast, it helped me realize that, okay, I am not just some terrible person that, deserves to be in this justice system, that sometimes like bad stuff happens and people kind of fall into this. And, listening to it, I'm a neurotypical person. And so, I didn't, and I still experienced almost all of those things, the spectrum of the fear and the shock and deciding to take a plea deal so that it would be over with, because I just needed it to be over with. These aren't bad people in the system. It just seems like a really bad system to me, where things are just moved through so quickly, and the volume of these things just creates this push effect where things are just pushed through. And I truthfully don't have the answer to what could be fixed. I think the only thing that I can see is just that everyone would be aware of the people behind the situations and how much something can affect someone when they're charged with something, and when they go to the court system, and when they're not heard, and when they no longer feel safe with the system that theoretically is supposed to be there to protect us. Now it's always something that I think about, no matter where I am with my dogs.
Yeah, I want to thank you for being willing to share your story, because I don't even know if I talked about this on the original podcast, but I grew up thinking that the people that are in the system deserve to be there and that generally they did something intentional that got them there. And it was only through practicing criminal defense and seeing all of these unique human stories and realizing that so often it actually wasn't even remotely the case, and people just got caught up. And so I believe very strongly that telling these stories and hearing these stories helps us humanize a system that, if we've never been involved in it ourselves, seems like it's running neutrally and fairly and working the way it's supposed to. But then there's stories like yours or Christian's and any number of others that's not what we think of when we think of the criminal justice system, most of us.